started?
Yep. Yes, I am.
Great, thank you. Okay, then we can go ahead and jump in. Hello, everybody. I'm Damon Yakovleff, Environmental Planner at Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District. The district was founded in 1946. The office is located in Windham, and our mission is to protect soil and water resources in Cumberland County, Maine. So here on the presentation today, we have Allie Clift, who's the district's education and outreach coordinator, and she'll be providing technical and facilitation assistance, and Neal Goldberg, legislative analyst from Maine Municipal Association. So I'd like to thank Neal and Maine Municipal Association for hosting us on their Zoom account this evening. That's a big help. So another acknowledgement, I'd like to acknowledge the other staff of the Conservation District and Christy Rabaska, who's an engineering consultant who provides technical assistance to municipalities in the region, whose work contributed to some of the slides that you'll see this evening. So the scope for the presentation this evening, many of you joined this presentation last year. So the presentation this evening builds on what was presented last year and includes some other important updates as well. It's going to start with an update on stormwater related legislation presented by Neal at MMA. And excuse me, I have an assistant here. We'll provide a background on water pollution, the importance of the Clean Water Act, and the MS4 permit. Go over a contrast between what's in your current MS4 permit and what's in the new permit that's going to become effective July 1, 2022, with the discussion of some of the municipal staffing, budget, and ordinance update needs that you'll, as elected officials, need to be aware of and be working on over the next couple of years. So one bit of housekeeping, this presentation is registered with Maine Bar Association for 1 hour of credit. So make sure that you entered your bar number when you registered, or else get that to us so we can report it to get the credit for you. Other professional development hour certificates are available upon request. Just put your email and the credit you'd like to receive in the chat, or you can email us and we can get that certificate over to you. And I'll note that the level of detail in this presentation, as with the one we presented last year, is intended to be the most relevant to elected officials. So if you're an environmental lawyer or somebody who works in the environmental field, some of this might be a refresher, but even for you, there still will be some important new information presented here. As far as how we'll do the presentation, we'll take some questions from you, if you could enter them in the chat, and we'll stop a few times through the presentation at section breaks and do some poll questions, and make sure that if you have any clarifying questions, we can answer them then as well. And we're available anytime via phone and email. If you want to call the district during business hours, we always have someone there answering the phone. So we're here as a resource for you. So don't feel like you have to ask your question now. If you think of something later, you can always get in touch with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neal, who's going to provide a water-related legislative update. So go ahead, Neal.
Thank you, Damon, and thank you for having us here. I won't take up too much time, but and pleased to present just a brief update on some of the happenings in Augusta at the legislature. The first four bills that you see up on the left have largely been worked through committee and are heading to the full legislature with support. The first two, LD 676 and LD 1801, are largely clerical changes to water classifications to either get state in compliance with EPA or to more of an upgrade to conform with existing uses already. LD 1809, also heading to the legislature with support, just allows for existing buildings in shoreland zones to be stilted or elevated This is primarily to make them in compliance with federal floodplain maps so that they can secure FEMA-provided flood insurance. This is generally supported by municipalities. And then that fourth bill, 1835, gives some exemptions to mountain biking trails to expedite permitting. I've spoken to the communities where there's a hub of mountain biking activity, and no one seems to have raised any objection to that. So all good on those fronts. The last two bills, LD 1875 and LD 1911, are further attempts by the state to get ahead of this PFAS and PFOA contamination. At seemingly every turn they make, they are running into some sort of industry or municipal operation barrier. These two bills were at first very municipally innocuous, but recent amendments have given them some cause of concern that they could impact municipal operations, probably not in the region that you all represent, but for MMA, we are tracking those two bills closely. I'll take this moment to just say, if you ever have questions about what's going on in Augusta, please reach out to the SFR team. We're here to answer questions, field comments, and more importantly, we want to hear the stories of what's going on in your communities. It helps make our testimony more lively and informed when we can share the actual on-the-ground experiences. And so, anyways, never hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to talk about stormwater or anything else that's on your mind. So with that, next slide, please. I'll make one quick shout out to ARPA, the American Rescue Plan. A few weeks ago, the final rule was released and it dramatically expanded the eligible uses. The good news for this audience is that a lot of stormwater related infrastructure, green infrastructure, was explicitly included in the final rule. So if there was ever any doubt that the types of projects that you guys are focused on are eligible, I think this should clear it up. So on the screen are some cut and pastes from the final rule. This is not an exhaustive list, but does touch on many of the projects that are ongoing and desired to be ongoing. So, put together a proposal, put it maybe in front of a legislative body, or if you are an elected official, you should feel comfortable pursuing these types of projects with your ARPA funds. Similar to legislation, happy to talk about this stuff anytime. Reach out to myself or my colleagues. And with that, I will wrap it up. I'll take some questions, but once again, thank you, Damon, for having us here. So.
Great. Thanks, Neal. We appreciate that. We appreciate all the information that you send out. Your weekly legislative updates are very valuable, just so everyone knows. MMA sends those out and you can sign up for them through MMA. They come out usually on Fridays. Is that right, Neal? So.
That's right. Yeah.
Great. So, any questions for Neal? Allie, do you see anything in the chat or I don't see any hands up? But...
So far, we are clear.
Okay.
Again, Damon, they're here for the star of the show. It's you. Good
All
luck.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Neal. We really appreciate that update. With that, we'll launch in. So we'll start with some context before we get into some of the details of what's in the permit about why this is important in some of the terms we use. So first of all, when we talk about stormwater, what we're talking about is precipitation, snow or rain that flows over the land, and it can carry many things along with it as it flows. That may include some things we don't necessarily want to see in our stormwater. That could be sand, sediment from construction sites, fertilizer and pesticides from lawns, pet waste from trails or public parks, road salt due to winter maintenance. A lot of that going on right now, as we all know. It's been a big year for chloride applications and road salt, litter, trash debris, and many other items that can degrade water quality because as the stormwater picks up these pollutants, it becomes polluted runoff. And most of the time, runoff that enters our storm drains goes directly into our water bodies without receiving any treatment. Now, sometimes that's not the case, but generally speaking, there isn't much treatment or any treatment that happens to our stormwater. It just gets directly into the water that we swim in, drink, or use for recreation, fishing. There's a lot of ways that it has impacts on our daily lives. So it's really important that we address stormwater pollution. So with that, we'll pause for a poll question, and I'll have Allie go ahead and launch that. You can also see who's still awake. The first question here is, what pollutant do you think impacts your community the most? Okay, we have some responses coming in. All right, give it few more seconds here. And then, all right, Allie, why don't you go ahead and share the results? Thank you. All right, so big chunk of you put erosion and sediment. And again, yeah, that's good to see because that's one of our biggest concerns. But fertilizers, litter, pet waste are up there too, and road salt. I might have done kind of a push-pull there by mentioning that, but it is indeed a very important pollutant of concern in our water bodies here in Maine. So thank you, Allie. So we'll stop sharing that. So we all know that this is important. It's a value. We want cleaner water because it protects our economy, our public health. It's the right thing to do, but it's also a legal requirement. So the Federal Clean Water Act, which is 50 years old this year, authored by Maine's own Senator Ed Muskie, authorizes the Environmental Protection Agency to implement the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, or NPDES. So under NPDES, a permit is required to discharge stormwater where certain criteria are met to waters of the United States. So the Maine program is administered by the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, and that's for municipalities that meet certain conditions for population size, density, urban development, and adjacency to other population centers. So there's 40 of these stormwater permits issued under the program that are called MS4 permits, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. We use the term MS4 a lot. And there's 30 municipalities in the state of Maine that have an MS4 permit, and 10 other agencies that include transportation agencies, public universities, military bases, etc. And the regulated municipalities must have a permit to direct stormwater runoff to water bodies in their communities while minimizing pollutants. If there is one goal for you all to take away from the presentation this evening, it's that your community has an MS4 permit that it must comply with. That's the major goal for this evening. And you being here actually helps meet one of the requirements in that permit, believe it or not. So thanks for being here, if for no other reason than to help meet that permit requirement. Now, the MS4 permit has been around for a while. In Maine, the first permits were issued in 2003, and they come in 5-year cycles. So it's important to note that each permit builds on the previous permit. There's new, more stringent requirements with each permit cycle. Also, the permit requirements are within the urbanized areas, which may change with each census. And there's some nuance there, but that's an important thing to note because it doesn't necessarily apply to all of the areas within a given municipality. So the new permit comes online in 2022, this year, on July 1st. And if you do some math, you might say, well, that doesn't quite line up with the 5-year cycle. And you're right. We're in year 9 of a 5-year permit right now. And there's some reasons for that we'll get into. So stay tuned for that. But you should also know that these permits apply to municipalities that are arranged into 4 clusters in the state. So we're in the biggest one here around Greater Portland and Greater Saco. There's 3 other clusters in Maine, though, who we work with on various things. That includes far southern Maine cluster, the Lewiston Auburn area, and the Bangor area. So the municipalities with these permits are subject to full compliance with requirements in 6 steps that are designed to reduce stormwater pollution, and they're called minimum control measures. There's also a requirement for improvement and protection of impaired water bodies. So water bodies that have been most affected by urban development and stormwater pollution. There's heightened scrutiny from Maine DEP, the EPA, other environmental groups. And it's important to note, too, that this is largely an unfunded federal mandate. Now, Neal mentioned there's some stimulus money. Sometimes there's grant money that can assist with implementing some of these requirements, or with developing ways to implement new requirements in some cases, but largely the costs for this are borne by the municipalities that are regulated. So there's some costs associated with this that are higher for regulated municipalities than non-regulated municipalities. There's also significant costs for non-compliance with the requirements in terms of fines, potentially per violation per day. So it's important to maintain compliance with the permit requirements. So the good news is you are not in this alone. First of all, I want to recognize that your municipalities have very capable, experienced staff working to ensure that your municipality maintains compliance. They do a great job with that. And you're also supported by regional effort. In our region, we have what's known as the Interlocal Stormwater Working Group, or ISWG. So ISWG includes 14 regulated municipalities in our area and 2 nested municipality permittees. So the University of Southern Maine and Southern Maine Community College. And through ISWG, the communities work together cooperatively to address the permit requirements. It's coordinated by Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District, where I work, Allie works. And that district's work satisfies the permit's education requirements and portions of the public participation requirement, as well as several other benefits for your communities as well. So that includes cost savings. So the member dues for ISWG are just over $12,000 for the next fiscal year. And that's significantly less expensive than hiring a dedicated person to work on implementing the education and public participation requirements. And the membership also allows you to leverage that support for matching grants, interns support, other benefits. That includes consistent messaging across the region with other regulated entities in other portions of the state, regulators, EPA, DEP, and then partners such as MMA, and coordinating with, in some cases, the environmental nonprofits and other interest groups. And we provide a framework for collective problem solving, trainings, and information exchange. So with that, I'll pause, see if there are any clarifying questions, or before we move on to talk about some of the parts of the new permit and some of the new requirements that you'll find in there. So Allie, have you seen any questions that we need to address?
So far, there are no questions in the chat.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so we'll plunge ahead then and talk about some of the requirements in the new permit. But first of all, something to make you all aware of is what's known as the Remand Rule. And this came about as a result of a suit that was filed in 2001 by environmental groups in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is California. And the court found that the way that the EPA was administering the stormwater program was not in compliance with the Clean Water Act. Specifically, that there was insufficient public participation in the permit process, and that there was a lack of permitting authority review, meaning that permittees were writing their own requirements, and instead of that, the permitting authority, in the case of Maine, that's the DEP, should be the one writing and enforcing these requirements. So after a long process, the final rule was issued and became effective in January of 2017, just before the renewal for the current MS4 permit we were operating under in Maine was about to come up. So that's the primary reason that we're in year 9 of the 5-year permit at this point. The rulemaking changes requiring a longer, more drawn out process. But I'll say it's been a good process, and we've got a good result, I think, as a result of some of those discussions that were had on finding the permit that everyone can live with. So some of the key takeaways are that now, instead of having just one general permit, the DEP had the option, 2 options for how to do the permitting. They could have one comprehensive general permit, or a 2-step process where they'd have a general permit plus a second step with an order for some more specific measures that municipalities would have to comply with. So Maine chose the 2-step process. So basically, through the process, all of the enforceable requirements must be in the permit, and they all must be clear, specific, and measurable, and must reduce pollutants to the maximum extent practicable. There's also expanded requirements for public comment and participation in the new process. So you also should know that we discussed this last time, that there was an appeal of the final permit to the Board of Environmental Protection by Friends of Casco Bay, which is an environmental nonprofit, requesting that 3 items be reinstated from a previous draft of the permit. And the board ordered 2 of those changes. The first of which has to do with impaired waters requirements. And this change does not deviate significantly from a lot of the existing efforts we have to address impaired waters issues. So it's not a huge change for us here in our region. But there was another part of this order that required low impact development be mandated. And that's, they cited the maximum extent practicable requirement, and the board agreed. So that's something that ended up being put into the final permit requirement. They also requested moving up the effective date, but that the board didn't agree with that, fortunately, because if they had done that, the permit would be effective now. So we had a little bit more time for implementation. So where we are right now is that the general permits in this 2-step process. So step 1's been completed. We're now in step 2, and municipalities are receiving their orders. So we generally know what's in those because there's been a comprehensive process involved with the DEP to determine what should be in those. And so, it's not final yet, still pending public comment, but we have a pretty good idea. We're able to develop our work plan around what we believe will be in there. So that's where that stands right now. So that should all be wrapped up within the next month or so, a couple months, and then we'll have our final 2-step permit in place. So you may be wondering, what's in this new permit? How does it differ from the current permit we're operating under? And probably most importantly for this audience, what are some of the implications for our municipalities in terms of fiscal and staffing impacts? And then, are there any ordinance updates you might need to make? So we'll go through that now in the 6 steps. So you'll have the idea of what to expect going forward. So First of all, step one is the public education and outreach requirement. And there's no huge changes from a municipal management perspective on this one. Perhaps some minor fiscal impacts. This is a requirement largely satisfied by the conservation district's work through ISWG. So some of the things that are the same, the Think Blue Maine program is going to be continuing with that messaging. The yardscaping program is going to be continuing, and that's to help homeowners reduce their use of pesticide and fertilizer products in their lawn, and incorporating more gardens and vegetation buffers that might protect some of our impaired water bodies a little bit better. Something that's different is there's going to be a new campaign to reach contractors to improve erosion and sediment control at construction sites through more trainings. And there's also a campaign to reduce pet waste on our trails and public parks. You'll probably see that campaign next year. You'll see some additional outreach efforts around pet owners. Some additional efforts also fall into this measure. That includes school education programs that we do, the Maine Stormwater Conference as well. And that's going to be held this year in Portland at Holiday Inn by the Bay on November 1st and 2nd. So go to our website if you're interested in that. Registration is going to open, I think, in March. So it's a really, really good program if you want to learn a lot more about stormwater in Maine. Okay, so requirement 2 is public participation. So there's some minor changes, but probably a minimal fiscal impact here. There's, as I mentioned, some increased requirement for public comment and accessibility of information due to the Remand Rule. But the public event is the same, and that's the Urban Runoff 5K race. It's going to be held in person this year, which is very exciting for us at the Southern Maine Community College campus, which is a beautiful venue, on April 23rd. Traditionally, it rains for the Urban Runoff too. So, we get to see stormwater in action that way, but, we'll see. Maybe it'll be a beautiful day too. So I encourage you to check out our website to see more information about that and how to sign up. There's some other above and beyond events as well, stream cleanups, household hazardous waste days, and some other types of public participation events that fit into this requirement. Requirement 3 is where there are some more significant changes and impacts to municipal budgets and staffing. So some things remain the same. So this is the requirement for illicit discharge detection elimination, IDDE. And some of the strategies around that are the same are requirements for mapping of your stormwater systems within your urban areas, where your catch basins, storm drains, or storm pipes and culverts, and probably most importantly, or ditches, but most importantly are going to be your outfalls. So outfalls are the location where your stormwater enters the environment. So if you have polluted runoff in your stormwater, that's where the pollution is entering the environment. So it's a pretty critical piece of infrastructure to look at as far as reducing how much pollution is entering the environment. So there's more scrutiny of those outfalls increasingly with each permit cycle. So under the current permit in effect now, outfall inspections are visual inspections. There's no requirement to do an analysis of the runoff. You could do a taste test, as one of our stormwater coordinators jokes, but under the new permit, there's going to be significantly more requirements for analysis of discharges at outfalls, and that may include more equipment, more staffing needs, and laboratory costs. So that's something to be aware of. Now, the good news is we're providing a lot of support for you on that through ISWG. So some comprehensive training programs for staff where we're making sure that the requirements are laid out and the procedures and the equipment needs so that that can be used for developing budgets and meeting that requirement. So we have 2 trainings for staff that are coming up on that within the next couple of months. One other thing to get on your radar too, so it's not a requirement in the upcoming permit, but in the permit, it's going to be coming out in 2027. We have a very good indication there's going to be even more requirements about outfalls, including wet weather monitoring, which would be logistically complicated and involve more staff time. So that's something we're paying a lot of attention to, and you don't need to be concerned about it right now, but it is something to be on the radar that I just want to let you know about, that we'll be looking at in the next permit cycle, very likely. All right. So requirement 4 is construction site runoff control. So there's some modest changes around this requirement. So the existing permit requires record keeping, project site inspections of construction sites. So much of that is going to remain the same. The biggest difference in the new permit is that the previous one allowed municipalities to rely on Chapter 500, which is a state regulation. The new permit is going to require an ordinance or other regulatory mechanism. So basically, municipalities that don't have an erosion and sedimentation control ordinance are going to need to have one. So the good news on that, again, I'll say, is that we're providing a significant amount of support for you on that through ISWG, and we were actually able to get some grant money through the Maine Coastal Program to develop a checklist. And some of you may have attended our workshop on that last summer. So that checklist allows municipalities to look at their ordinances and determine, what might be required to be in compliance with the new requirement, and also incorporate some climate change provisions as well. That are kind of optional measures that were developed through that checklist. So that was phase 2 of the grant. We were actually able to get some even more funding through a phase. So there's a phase 1, and now there's going to be a phase 2 of that grant that's going to let us work on actually developing a model erosion and sedimentation control ordinance. So that's something that we're going to be working on through a large multi-stakeholder committee over the next year or so. And so that's going to be really helpful for municipalities working on preparing for this new requirement. And that ordinance would have to be in place by July 1 of 2024. So sort of in tandem with that is requirement 5, which is post-construction discharge management. So there's some changes to that as well, largely because, as I mentioned, this appeal from Friends of Casco Bay, which led to a requirement for a low impact development ordinance. So many of the provisions of this, the annual inspections and review, are going to be the same, but the biggest change is this new ordinance that municipalities are going to be required to adopt. So again, we're providing a lot of support on that to this multi-stakeholder ordinance committee. So it's developing the erosion sedimentation control ordinance. It's also working on a low impact development ordinance. So through that process, we're going to be developing this ordinance. That's going to be reviewed. It's going to have a lot of input from stakeholders, including the DEP. And then it's going to be finalized at the end of this year. And it's going to provide a floor for ordinances. So you don't have to adopt that one. You could. It might be recommended that you do, but it's up to the municipalities to ensure that if they adopt this some separate ordinance, that it's at least as stringent as the model ordinance that's being developed through this process. And fortunately, there's some grant money behind it, so the cost is not entirely borne by the municipalities. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be a lot of support around it. We are planning some workshops, both at the sort of 1,000-foot level later this year. And then next year in 2023, there'll be some more targeted workshops that are more at, say, the 100-foot level. We'll work with municipalities and your staff and identify some of the ordinance changes to because these new ordinances will also require some changes to other ordinances that may reference them. So we'll be providing some workshops and support around that. And as municipal officials, elected officials, that's something you'll likely be looking at probably sometime in early to mid 2023, I would guess, depending on the timeline in your particular municipality. So something to be on the radar, not an immediate concern here, but it is something that you'll be looking at in the next year or so. All right, so requirement 6, this is good housekeeping, pollution prevention. So these are efforts to reduce pollution by doing street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, trainings of employees at municipal facilities about what to do about material storage, spill control. And most of this is going to be the same. There's a few nuanced differences to catch basin cleaning, but no major changes to this requirements. So that's the 6 steps. This might be called step 7. It's your impaired waters requirements. So the biggest change here is for some municipalities, you're going to have to adopt 3 BMPs or best management practices for each of your urban impaired streams. So not every municipality has an urban impaired stream. Some municipalities have several of them. But urban impaired streams are those streams that are the most impacted by pollution from urban development. So one thing that's we're able to do on the regional level is meet 2 of those requirements regionally in most cases. And for that, we've developed a chloride reduction BMP. So it's winter maintenance training and some other work around winter maintenance. And then riparian buffer BMP. So it's an expansion of the yardscaping program for residents who live near these urban impaired streams to help give them some better protection through development of vegetated buffers. And each community will also have one community-specific BMP. A lot of the time that would be at some kind of structural improvement or upgrade. So that's community-specific. So there's some other technical changes around this. I mentioned that many of them are already being addressed through compliance with some of the existing DEP total and maximum daily load rules. But those are TMDLs. So you can certainly check out DEP's website for more information about that. And we're making sure that all of your stormwater professionals are well versed in what they need to do to maintain compliance with that. So there's also some additional impaired waters requirements that are referenced in some of the other steps, especially in minimum control measures 1, 4, and 5. So sort of woven through this permit is sort of an effort to protect your impaired waterways. With that, we'll pause again and do another poll. So I'll have Ali launch that, please. All right, so this is a 2-part question. So do you think your municipality will need to require more staff time to comply with the new MS4 requirements? And then will your municipality need to allocate more funding to comply with the new requirements? So see some answers coming in there. That's great. Just give it one more second here. All right, Ali, why don't you go ahead and share the results? Thank you. So, yep, as you can see here, looks like most of you think you'll probably have to allocate more staff time, and almost all of you plan to allocate more funding to comply with the new requirements. So, all right, thank you, Allie. Thank you all for weighing in on that. So, yep, it's certainly something to be aware of and prepare for as we head toward the enacting this new permit. So I have just a couple more things here, and then we'll get into some questions and discussion. So accountability, you should all know that you must keep comprehensive records documenting compliance. And so you also have to send annual reports to DEP documenting your compliance with the permit requirements. And we, through ISWG, provide support for documenting minimum control measures 1 and 2. We send that to your stormwater staff every year, and that gets included with your annual report. We also do record keeping to comply with audits. We can expect to be audited once per permit cycle by DEP and possibly EPA as well. So when that happens, you'll be required to provide documentation that you've complied with all of these requirements. And so we'll give you a big box full of records that you'd use for that. So that should be, we can't say when that will happen exactly, but it's something to expect over the next permit cycle. So I'll just recap some of the upcoming events that you should know about from the municipal official perspective, about what's coming up, what you should expect. So from now until the end of June, municipalities will work to complete preparations for the new permit, budgeting, identifying needs for staff time, supplies, everything else, completing that second step permit process. And then July 1, 2022, the new permit will become effective. So then you'll work to implement and comply with the new permit requirements. In the fall, we're going to be working on finalizing those 2 model ordinances for low impact development and erosion and sedimentation control. And then in 2023 through 2024, we'll work with municipalities and staff to identify what ordinance changes are needed at the specific municipal level. And then you'll work to put those into place as municipal officials. So with that, we have one final poll question, and then we'll open things up for discussion. So Allie, please go ahead and launch the poll. So the question is, how much did you learn? This is helpful for us to sort of adjust our outreach. All right, thank you very much. See those responses coming in. All right, thanks, Allie. Why don't you go ahead and share those? All right, thanks. Well, we hope that this training has been helpful for you. We're available to answer questions either now or when the questions come up. Really get in touch with us. Here's our contact information, and we'll go ahead and include this contact information in an email follow-up to this presentation to everyone who registered. We'll include a link to a video recording of the presentation so you can refer back to it. And 2 of the documents that Neal has put together about the ARPA funding resources. So yeah, we're here to provide information and resources to you. And yeah, with that, I'll stop my screen share and we'll open things up for any questions you may have. So go ahead and raise your hand, put it in the chat.
So we had a couple of questions come in the chat. The first is, would the Yellow Duck Awareness Campaign have been funded by a grant? And the answer is it was a really long time ago, but it's not currently being funded by a grant. However, we are able to offset some of our awareness campaign costs by using the AmeriCorps program. We currently have an AmeriCorps member at the Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District office that does a lot of tasks as part of their service at our office. And then we also partner with a lot of the local colleges to have summer interns that help us do education and outreach and some of the field work as well. We'd love to increase those programs, but right now we're thankful for what we have to offset the costs that we can. And then an additional question that came into the chat is, will you be sharing the draft ordinances? And the answer is yes. We'll be sharing them multiple times for people to review, provide comments on, and there will be multiple workshops that you can provide additional questions and comments to as well, and then also receive assistance to see how they will work with your individual ordinance setup.
Yep, and the timeline for that will be
additional questions. Oh, go ahead, Damon.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that the model ordinance should be shared out in the fall, and it's going to be reviewed by DEP. And once that review is complete and it's finalized, we'll share it out again, and we'll have a workshop on it for municipal officials, planning board members, and other interested parties. And then after that workshop, there'll be sort of some focused workshops that will probably include just a few municipalities at a time. We'll look in more detail at your ordinances and some of the needs you have for updates. David, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Damon, thank you. On requirement 5, when that comes out, the part of the ordinance, you speak about erosion control. A lot of times what happens is if the lot, they go in and clear it without any permits or anything. One of the things we should do in our ordinance is make erosion control be an inspection first before you get any permits whatsoever.
Yeah,
that'd be an easy fix for a lot of things, and you'd know it's in place instantly.
So sort of the pre-construction process
before anything starts,
before any permitting. Okay,
right. They have to have erosion control in place first.
Yep.
And inspect it.
Yeah.
And Damon, actually, that's how Biddeford does it. In our pre-construction meetings, we inform the contractor that that's a must. They have to notify us, go out and inspect it before we give codes off and then the authorization to proceed. And it's worked pretty well. So
yeah, I think it'd be an easy fix.
Yeah, great suggestion. Yeah, and so I made a note here, and we'll make sure that that's something that's included in the model ordinances that's getting developed. So, and then so the way it works too is some of these things will be sort of required, some of them will be optional. So, if a municipality doesn't want to include that, they wouldn't necessarily have to. But if think it's a good idea to, you could. So there's some other measures like that as well, and I can certainly share that with you too once that's available, as well as the LID ordinance. Great. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat, but if you have some, feel free to either type or raise your hand. Yep.
And I'll invite Neal. Neal, do you have anything else you'd like to share on the part of MMA?
No, nothing from me, but again, available to answer questions anytime. Thanks for having us.
Great. All right. So we'll just give it a beat here, see if anyone else wants to ask anything. But again, we'll share our contact information. And like I said, you can call our office. We have someone answer the phone during business hours if you have questions. We're here to provide a resource for communities. And, I look forward to having some more discussions, talking about these ordinances with you in the next year or so, and providing you support on that. And with that, I think we can wrap up. Thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate it, and good to see your interest in water conservation. And hope you all have an excellent evening.